Hey guys. Tonight we wander through narrow cobbled streets past crooked timber-framed houses, leaning so far they almost touch above your head. Lantern light flickers against damp stone walls, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and something less pleasant, let's call it, authentic medieval perfume. You hear the uneven clatter of cartwheels over worn paving, a dog barking somewhere down an alley, and the mutter of voices in a tongue that's half familiar and half foreign. This is a place alive with trade gossip and secrets, though if we're honest, you probably wouldn't survive this trip for long. Between the questionable water, the random brawls, and the occasional outbreak of plague, our visit is definitely safer in imagination. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you posted in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the town gates. They're not just decorative, they're serious defenses, tall, heavy doors of oak bound with iron thick enough to turn away a charging horse or battering ram. A watchman peers at you from above, leaning over the parapet of a squat gatehouse. It's built to keep trouble out and remind anyone entering that this town controls who comes and goes. In the dark, you might catch the glint of his spear tip as he shifts his weight, perhaps wondering why you're here at this odd hour. Passing inside, the world narrows. Streets wind unpredictably, hemmed in by buildings that seem to grow taller the deeper you go. The air feels closer, and shadows cling to corners. Every surface seems textured, rough plaster, warped wood, uneven stone. Overhead, a laundry line stretches between houses, dripping faintly onto the cobbles below. Somewhere to your left, a cat darts under a doorway, vanishing into the smell of baking bread. You follow the main street toward the heart of town. It's a jumble of sites, shop fronts with swinging signs painted to show what's sold within, since most people can't read. Barrels of salted fish stacked outside a merchant's stall. A tanner's shop whose smell hits you long before you reach it. You make a mental note to avoid that side of the street if you can. The marketplace is a broad, open space, though open is relative. Stalls and carts crowd every available patch covered in striped cloth or patched canvas. The voices here are a constant low roar, a mixture of bargaining gossip and the occasional shout from a seller hawking especially fine wares. A woman sells apples, their skins glossy in the lantern light. Another offers skeins of dyed wool bright against the drab evening air. You notice the mud underfoot is churned thick from the day's traffic, and you step carefully, though you're pretty sure your boots are already doomed. At the center stands a stone cross, sometimes used for public announcements, sometimes for punishment. Tonight, it's just a landmark with a few locals leaning against its base to swap stories. Their accents are thick, their cloaks patch their eyes watchful. You're an outsider here and they know it. To one side of the market rises the church, its tall, narrow windows reflecting flickers of candlelight from within. The bells are silent now, but you imagine their clang would carry across the entire town, calling people to worship or warning of fire or attack. In the shadow of the church stands the guild hall, a sturdier building than most where the town's skilled tradesmen meet, argue, and decide how business should be run. You can picture a group of them now seated on benches inside, the air thick with the smell of ale and heated opinion. The air changes as you move past the market, less perfumed by spices, and bread more edged with something raw and metallic. You've reached the smithy, Sparks fly from the open doorway as a blacksmith hammers at a glowing horseshoe, the rhythm echoing down the street. His apprentice pumps the bellows feeding the forge's hungry fire. The heat pours into the cool night air, and you can feel it against your face even from a distance. Beyond the road slopes down toward the river. Here the buildings are humbler, simple cottages with thatched roofs, their walls leaning in sympathy with the years. You hear the rush of water before you see it, and then you're standing at the quay watching the black surface ripple under the moon. Flat-bottomed boats are moored here loaded with barrels, sacks, and bundles. Somewhere out there in the dark, traders are still making their way upriver, hoping to reach town before dawn. A wooden bridge spans the water, its timbers slick with mist. You cross slowly, listening to the hollow sound of your own footsteps. On the far bank, you glance back at the town lanterns, glowing like scattered embers, the taller buildings rising dark against the night sky. It's quieter here, but the smell of the river is strong, carrying hints of fish and silt. In the near distance, you see another wall, a smaller inner ring of fortifications protecting the wealthiest quarter. Here live the merchants whose fortunes rise and fall with the tide of trade and the officials who keep the town's business running. You imagine their homes, sturdier stone buildings with carved doorways and glass in the windows, luxuries most townsfolk will never know. Guards stand at the gate, their posture relaxed, but their hands never far from the hilts of their swords. Back inside the outer wall, you wander again through the warren of streets. The night deepens and shutters close one by one. Somewhere a lute plays softly. Somewhere else a baby cries. You think about the layers of life packed into this tight space, merchants and beggars, craftsmen and thieves, priests and sinners all bound together by the invisible rules that make this place work, or at least keep it from falling apart. And though you're just passing through for this moment, you're part of it too, breathing the same air, treading the same uneven stones, worn smooth by centuries of feet. You turn down a narrower lane now, one that dips gently toward the lower quarter. The air is damper here, carrying the scent of river mud and cooking fires. Houses press so close that the upper floors lean into one another, forming a shadowed tunnel overhead. It's quieter than the market, but you sense movement figures slipping through doorways, a whispered exchange between two silhouettes under an arch. A splash of torchlight catches the glint of a knife hilt, and you instinctively keep walking. Your boots squelch through patches of muck where water has collected in ruts. This lane is less cared for. The paving stones are missing in places, and rainwater has carved tiny rivulets in the dirt. You pass a butcher's shop, its wooden shutters closed for the night, but still carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of blood. Across from it, a cooper's yard is cluttered with half-finished barrels, their staves propped up like skeletal ribs in the gloom. Further along, you come to the dye-maker's workshop. Even at night, the air here bites at your nostrils sharp, with the tang of fermented urine, which the dyers use in their work. In the daytime, the yard would be strung with bolts of fabric in brilliant reds, blues, and yellows. Tonight, it's silent, though the faint, ghost-like outlines of cloth hang limp in the still air, catching stray flecks of moonlight. A faint sound draws your attention, a dull thud followed by a low laugh. You glance down a side alley and see a tavern, its heavy wooden door swinging open to let out bursts of firelight and the smell of beer. Laughter spills into the street, along with the thump of boots on wooden floors. Inside, men and women lean over rough tables, tankards in hand, their cheeks flushed from drink. A fiddler plays in the corner, nearly drowned out by the noise. It's tempting to step inside, but the thought of that close heat, the press of bodies, and the likelihood of stumbling into a brawl makes you think better of it. Instead, you keep moving toward the part of town where the craftsmen live. By day, this would be the industrious heart of the settlement, but at night, it's a patchwork of quiet yards and dimly lit workshops. A potter's shed sits at the corner, its wheels still streaked with damp clay from earlier work. Next door, a weaver's cottage smells faintly of lanolin and warm wool. You can almost hear the soft rhythm of the loom, though tonight, the shuttle rests in its frame. The street twists unexpectedly, opening onto a small square. A well stands at its center, the bucket rope creaking faintly as it sways in the night breeze. Around it, houses cluster like gossiping neighbors, their wooden beams dark with age. One window is still lit, revealing a shadow, moving slowly back and forth inside a woman, tending to some late-night task. Perhaps mending clothes or stirring a pot over the fire. The rest of the windows are shuttered tight against the chill. From here, you follow the faint sound of hooves on stone. It leads you to a stable near the edge of town, its wide doors left ajar to let out the warm, earthy smell of hay and horses. Inside, a sleepy stable boy is sprawled on a pile of sacks, his cap pulled low over his eyes. A chestnut mare shifts in her stall, snorting softly as you pass. These animals are valuable, vital for travel trade, and sometimes survival, and their care is one of the most constant rhythms of town life. As you wander back toward the center, the terrain rises. The air feels drier, and the buildings grow larger, sturdier, as though they've been here longer. You're heading toward the older quarter. At the crest of the hill, the castle looms, its curtain walls and towers etched in pale silver by the moon. This is the Lord's domain, both fortress and residence, a reminder of the power that underpins every part of the town. By day, you'd hear the ring of the smiths who maintain the Lord's arms, the clatter of hooves in the bailey, the bark of commands from the garrison. Tonight the gates are shut, the drawbridge raised, and only the narrow slit windows glow faintly with torchlight. You skirt the outer wall of the castle, running your hand along the rough-cut stone. From here, the view stretches out over the rooftops, chimneys standing like silent sentries. Beyond them, the dark countryside rolls away into the night, dotted with the occasional farmstead or flicker of a shepherd's fire. It's easy to forget, inside the bustle of the town, how small this place really is compared to the wilds that surround it. Descending again, you pass through a cluster of houses whose walls bulge outward with age. One doorway is marked with a crude carving of a fish, perhaps the home of a fisherman or fishmonger. Another bears a painted shield, the colors faded almost to nothing. The wood here is worn smooth where countless hands have pushed doors open, countless feet have stepped across thresholds. You find yourself back in the market square, now almost empty. The stalls are packed away, their canvas covers folded or simply draped over wooden frames. A lone watchman leans against the stone cross, his halberd resting in the crook of his arm. He glances at you, but says nothing, his gaze moving lazily from shadow to shadow. Above, the sky has deepened to the black of late night, the stars sharp and cold. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, twice, then falls silent. You take a seat on the edge of a dry fountain, feeling the cool stone under your palms. The square seems bigger now without the crowd, its emptiness amplifying every small sound. The faint rattle of a sign in the breeze, the scuff of a rat's claws on cobblestone, the sigh of the wind through narrow gaps between buildings. This is the hour when the town exhales, when even the restless seem to slow their movements, and for a moment, you simply sit and let the quiet settle over you like a cloak. From your seat at the fountain, you notice a faint glow in the distance, not the pale light of the moon, but the warm, flickering orange of fire. At first, you think it might be an inn's hearth spilling light onto the street. But as you rise and walk toward it, you find a small bakery still alive with activity. Through the open doorway drifts the smell of fresh bread, unexpected at this hour, until you remember that bakers begin their work long before dawn. Inside, a man stands before a wide brick oven, sliding loaves into its mouth with a long wooden peel. His sleeves are rolled high and his face flushed from the heat, and though he glances up at you, he doesn't pause. The bread waits for no one. The glow from the bakery spills onto the narrow lane outside, casting warped shadows against the walls. Across the way, a wooden sign creaks in the wind, a carving of a sheaf of wheat, the baker's trademark. Nearby, a cat slinks past its eyes, glinting green before it disappears into the dark. The whole lane smells faintly of yeast and ash, the kind of scent that makes you feel hungrier the more you breathe it in. Following the curve of the street, you pass a building whose upper floor juts out far above the lower, creating a sheltered walkway beneath. A bench is set against the wall here, and an old man sits hunched on it, wrapped in a patched cloak. He gives you a nod but says nothing, his eyes half closed as though he might drift off at any moment. Behind him, a lantern burns low, its glass cloudy with soot. You drift toward the outskirts again, where the houses grow farther apart, and small gardens edge the lanes. These are kitchen plots, fenced with wattle or low stone walls, growing herbs, cabbages, leeks, and hardy greens. In summer, they'd be full of life, but tonight, you see only the shapes of dormant stalks under the moonlight. A gate creaks as you pass, swinging loosely on its hinge. Somewhere nearby, a chicken clucks softly in its sleep. A little farther on, you find yourself beside the town wall once more. This section is less imposing than the main gate, though the parapet still rises above you like a dark ridge. Torches burn at intervals along the top, their flames licking at the night air. A guard paces here, his steps measured, his breath fogging in the chill. Beyond the wall stretches open land fields, lying fallow, low meadows, threaded with faint silver from the river's course. The stillness makes the town feel like a world apart, as though the wall marks not just a boundary of stone, but a barrier between two realms. Turning back toward the heart of town, you take a lane that slopes gently downward. The paving stones here are slick, worn smooth by centuries of feet, hooves, and wheels. You pass a cooperage, this one shut tight for the night, and then a narrow-fronted building with a painted board showing a cluster of grapes. The smell of wine lingers faintly. Perhaps it's the home of a vintner or a wine cellar whose cellar runs cool beneath the street. The lane widens into another small square, this one dominated by a tall post with a crossbar near the top. It's a gallows, though no rope hangs from it now. By day, it would serve as a grim reminder of justice and authority, but tonight, it's just a shadow against the stars. Still, you give it a wide berth as you pass. At one corner of the square stands a pillory, two wooden boards, hinged together, ready to lock around a miscreant's neck and wrists. Even in the quiet, it seems to carry the echo of jeers and thrown refuse from the crowd that would gather here on market days. From here, you wander toward the tanner's quarter. The change in air is immediate, a sour, oily tang that creeps into your nostrils and clings there. The work of tanning leather is foul but essential. By day, this area would be alive with activity, men scraping hides on wooden frames, vats of bark, and water steaming gently piles of raw skins, waiting their turn. Now the place is silent. The vats dark, though the smell is stubborn as ever. You keep your pace steady, eager to move on. At the far edge of the tanner's quarter, you stumble upon a small bridge spanning a narrow stream. The water trickles under it, catching glints of starlight in its ripples. You pause, leaning on the railing. Somewhere upstream, the stream feeds the moat around the castle. Somewhere downstream, it joins the river. The sound of water is soothing here, a rare soft note amid the hard edges of town life. Crossing the bridge brings you into a quieter residential lane. The houses here are modest, their doors painted in faded colors, their shutters latched tight. A faint smell of wood smoke drifts from chimneys, curling upward into the crisp night. You catch the muffled sound of laughter from one home, just a warm human hum beneath the cold sky. For a moment, you imagine stepping inside, feeling the fire on your face, hearing the familiar scrape of a chair on wooden boards. But this is not your home, and you keep walking. As you move on, the streets begin to narrow again, closing in like pages of a book. Somewhere overhead, a shutter bangs softly against a wall. Your footsteps echo between the buildings, the sound bouncing back to you in the close air. You're heading toward the poorer quarter now, where the houses are more fragile, patched with whatever wood or stone could be found. Here, the town's wealth is a distant thing, and life is measured in smaller comforts. A loaf of bread, a dry roof, a good day's work. Yet even here, there's a rhythm. A lamp glows in a window where a seamstress works late, her hands moving steadily through cloth. A child peeks from behind a doorframe, eyes wide at the sight of a stranger passing. In the shadows of a doorway, two men exchange a few quiet words before slipping away into the maze of alleys. And as you walk on, you realize that every part of this town, grand or humble, bustling or quiet, breathes the same night air. Each stone, each timber, each flicker of light in the dark belongs to the same living, shifting thing. The town is more than its buildings. It is a web of lives bound together in ways you can only glimpse in passing, each thread catching the faint, slow pulse of a medieval night. The lane bends again, and you find yourself emerging into a long, narrow street, lit by a row of torches set into iron brackets. Their flames sway in the night breeze, sending shadows sliding across the ground like restless spirits. The houses here are taller, their upper floors overhanging so much they almost touch the narrow gap above you, framing a strip of stars. Somewhere above, you hear the faint creak of a rope and pulley. Perhaps someone hauling up a bucket of water or lowering down a basket to a neighbor. You pass a small workshop with its door ajar. Inside, by the glow of a single oil lamp, a man works carefully at a bench. His hands move with slow precision, shaping a piece of wood into something finer. The air smells faintly of shavings and beeswax. He doesn't look up as you pass, lost in his craft, the quiet of the night, his companion. Farther along, you reach a modest square, one side of which is dominated by the tall, narrow facade of the town's hospital. It's not grand, but its arched doorway is marked with a painted sign of a red cross, faded but still visible. By day, the place would be bustling with activity, herbalists tending to the sick nuns, carrying baskets of bandages, and the occasional cry from a patient enduring a rough treatment. At this hour, the windows are dark, save for one where a thin candle flickers behind a curtain. You imagine a healer keeping vigil over someone's bed, mixing a bitter infusion in hopes it will help. Moving past you, find yourself alongside the wall of a churchyard. The scent here is of damp grass and old stone. Through the wrought iron gate, you glimpse the crooked silhouettes of gravestones leaning this way and that like tired old men. A yew tree rises black against the sky, its boughs swaying faintly. Somewhere inside the church itself, a soft chant drifts into the air, low, steady, and hypnotic. Perhaps a monk keeping the night office, his voice winding through the empty nave lifting toward the rafters. A narrow alley draws you on. The stones underfoot grow slick with damp, and the air is close. On either side, wooden doors line the walls, each with its own iron latch, each marked by scratches and signs of long use. One door opens suddenly as you pass, spilling lamplight into the lane. A woman steps out, balancing a basket on her hip. She nods to you politely before vanishing into the shadows, her footsteps swallowed by the night. You follow the sound of running water and find yourself at another fountain, this one simpler than the dry one in the market. Water spills continuously from a carved spout into a shallow basin rippling under the light of a nearby torch. A jug sits on the stone lip, forgotten or left for common use. You cup your hands and take a sip. The water is cold, metallic, carrying the taste of the stone channel it traveled through. From here, the street begins to climb again. The stones are uneven, and the way is steep enough to slow your pace. At the top, you pause, turning to see the town spread beneath you. The market square is a faint shape in the darkness, the church spire rising like a black spear against the sky. Beyond the walls encircle the whole like the clasp on a locket. Beyond them, the moonlit countryside lies silent, the edges blurring into the horizon. You continue on and reach a row of houses with more elaborate facades. Their wooden beams are carved with decorative patterns, spirals, flowers, even the occasional animal. Glass glints faintly in some of the upper windows, catching the torchlight. These belong to wealthier townsfolk, perhaps merchants or minor officials. The air here seems cleaner, as though the smells of the tanners, the dye makers, and the fishmongers have been left behind in the lower streets. One door is slightly ajar, and the sound of low voices filters out. You catch the clink of metal, perhaps coins being counted, or cups being set down on a table. You pass without lingering, knowing that business, even after dark, can be as serious here as in the daylight. Ahead, the street meets another gate, smaller than the main one, set into a thick stretch of wall. This is the postern gate used for quieter comings and goings. A guard stands here too, leaning on his spear. He watches you approach, his gaze unreadable in the half-light. You nod. He gives a slight nod in return, but does not speak. Beyond the gate lies open land and the faint outline of a road leading off toward unseen villages and woods. You turn back into the town and take a side street lined with low shops, their shutters closed. Signboards hang from wooden beams overhead, a painted boot for the cobbler, a pair of crossed scissors for the tailor, a candle for the chandler. Even shut tight, they seem to hum faintly, with the memory of the day's trade, the knock of a hammer on leather, the snip of shears, the smell of hot wax poured into molds. The street narrows again, funneling you toward the sound of music. It's faint at first, just a few notes on a pipe, but as you draw closer, it becomes clearer, a slow, winding melody played for no one but the night. You find its source in a shadowed doorway where a young man leans pipe to his lips. He doesn't notice you, or if he does, he doesn't mind. The tune drifts upward, twining between the rooftops, slipping away into the darkness beyond. You walk on the music fading behind you and realize that the night has deepened still further. The last few lanterns gutter low, their oil nearly spent. The air has taken on that particular stillness that comes just before the first hint of dawn, a pause as though the town itself is holding its breath. Somewhere far off, a cock crows once too early, then falls silent again. You turn down another narrow lane, one so tight you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms. The stones here are old, their edges worn to smooth curves. Somewhere above you, a shutter squeals faintly as the wind teases it, then slams shut with a muffled thump. You keep your steps quiet, though in a place like this, every footfall seems to carry. The lane empties into a modest courtyard surrounded by plain, timber-framed houses. In the center, a wooden trough stands beside a pump. You lean on the handle experimentally, and water splashes into the trough with a cold, metallic rush. The sound echoes softly against the walls, blending with the faint rustle of wind in unseen corners. Across the courtyard, you spot a small doorway framed by an arch of rough stone. Above it, a crude carving of a fish suggests the home of a fisherman or fish seller. The door is bolted tight now, but you imagine the morning here, the slap of wet nets on the cobblestones, the air heavy with the briny tang of river catch, and the low murmur of bargaining voices. Beyond the courtyard lies a row of simple workshops. A woodcarver's bench sits under a slanted awning littered with curls of pale shavings. Next to it, a cooper's shed smells faintly of damp oak, the staves stacked neatly against one wall. Even in the dark, there's a sense of work paused, not abandoned tools laid ready for the next day, projects midway to completion. Following the lane outward, you come upon another open space, a livestock pen, its low fence enclosing a few huddled shapes. Goats, perhaps, or sheep, their soft breaths steaming faintly in the cool air. One shifts and gives a quiet bleat, more a sigh than a call. The smell of hay and animal warmth lingers here, comforting in its own way. Not far beyond the ground rises gently toward a cluster of sturdier houses. Their walls are built of stone rather than timber, their roofs tiled instead of thatched. You realize you've wandered into another of the wealthier districts, though still far humbler than the merchant quarter. These may be the homes of respected craftsmen or prosperous farmers who've moved within the walls for safety. Lanterns still burn in a few windows, their golden glow spilling in soft rectangles onto the cobbles. At the end of the street, you find yourself at the edge of a small green, a rare open patch inside the cramped confines of town. A great oak tree stands here, its branches spreading wide over the grass. Even in the darkness, its presence feels old and sure, a silent witness to centuries of change. Beneath it lies a bench worn smooth by countless evenings of conversation and quiet reflection. Tonight, it sits empty, the shadows pooled deep at its base. From the green, a narrow path leads you toward the back of the churchyard you glimpsed earlier. The air grows still, the night hushed, as though in respect. A low stone wall borders the path beyond which the ground swells gently upward into rows of graves. The stones vary in size and shape, some simple slabs, others carved with intricate crosses or angelic figures now weathered by time. Moonlight catches on the damp grass, and you can hear the faint drip of water from the eaves of the church. You walk quietly past the graves, the hush wrapping around you like a heavy cloak. Somewhere a nightbird calls, once its voice low and mournful. You find the far gate of the churchyard, and step back into the town, where the air seems somehow lighter, though still touched by that quiet weight. The lane here is lined with houses whose ground floors are given over to small shops. A faint smell of spice clings to one, perhaps a merchant who deals in pepper cinnamon or cloves brought from distant ports. Another smells of honey and beeswax, the work of a chandler, crafting candles for every home and hall in the town. Even in darkness, you sense the variety of lives folded into this place, each doorway a world unto itself. You pause at a corner where a small shrine is set into the wall. A niche shelters a carved figure of a saint, its features softened by time. A tiny lamp burns before it, casting a warm halo against the stone. The air here smells faintly of melted tallow and incense, and you imagine weary townsfolk stopping for a moment's prayer as they pass. From here, the street curves gently toward the river once more. You hear it before you see it, the low, steady rush against the quay. Lanterns bob faintly along the banks, where a few late-working fishermen are unloading their catch. Their voices carry softly, mingling with the slap of water against hulls. Crates thump onto the dock ropes, creak, and the faint smell of fish and wet rope drifts on the breeze. You wander along the quay past boats moored tight for the night. Some rock gently with the current, their masts ticking faintly against rigging. Farther along, a narrow bridge spans the water toward a dark cluster of buildings on the far bank. The timbers groan softly under your step as you cross the water, whispering below. From the bridge's crest, you look back at the town, its rooftops jagged against the sky, its lanterns glowing like a scatter of gold coins in the dark. Beyond the bridge lies a quieter quarter still, where houses sit apart from one another, each with a little space to breathe. Here the air feels fresher, touched by the river's cool breath. The sounds of the town fade into the distance until only your footsteps and the rustle of leaves remain. Somewhere out here you sense the fields begin and the rhythm of life slows to match the land. You follow the quieter road for a time, listening to the night settle in around you. The houses here have low sloping roofs and wide chimneys. Many are built of a mix of timber and stone, their walls whitewashed so that they catch the moonlight in a faint ghostly glow. Small gardens hug their fronts, patches of herbs, a few staked plants, maybe a plum tree or two. By day, these would be tended carefully. Tonight they lie still, the leaves whispering only when the wind stirs. As you walk, you pass a well with its bucket left hanging partway down. The rope creaks gently as it sways. You glance into the darkness within, catching the faint reflection of stars in the water far below. The air around it is cool and damp, touched with that deep earth smell that wells often carry. Beyond the well, a cluster of outbuildings stands just off the lane sheds for tools pens for animals and what looks like a small smokehouse. The faintest wisp of wood smoke escapes its chimney, curling away into the night. Someone has been preserving meat here, perhaps for the winter ahead. The scent is warm and savory, and for a moment it lingers in your throat. The road curves again, leading you to a small open patch where two paths meet. At the center stands a lich gate, a simple wooden roof over an open frame meant for sheltering mourners or resting a coffin before burial. It feels oddly still here, as though the night itself pauses in respect. A lantern hangs from one beam, burning low and steady, casting long shadows into the grass. Taking the left path, you begin a slow descent back toward the heart of town. The sound of the river reaches you again, mingled now with a faint clatter, someone working late in a nearby shed. You glance through a doorway and see a wheelwright bent over a cartwheel, his hands moving with practiced ease as he checks the iron rim for flaws. He nods once when he notices you, then returns to his work. The scrape of metal on wood echoes faintly in the cool air. Closer to the riverbank, you come upon a row of small warehouses. Their doors are shut and barred, but you can smell the goods within, grain perhaps, or salted fish, or cloth packed tightly in crates. The walls are thick, their timbers darkened with age and the marks of years of trade. A rat darts across the cobbles in front of you, disappearing between two barrels stacked in a corner. You follow the key for a while, passing the occasional lantern hung from a post. One swings lazily in the breeze, casting a rhythmic pattern of light and shadow across the path. Farther along, a boat is being unloaded even at this late hour. Two men work silently, passing sacks from the hold to the dock with the easy rhythm of long practice. The sacks land with a soft thud, their contents shifting faintly. You catch the scent of grain, dry and faintly sweet. Leaving the quay, you take a side street lined with modest cottages. Here, the cobblestones are uneven with tufts of grass growing between them. The houses lean into one another, their eaves nearly touching, creating a tunnel-like effect. You hear the distant murmur of voices from one open window, a low, steady conversation between people who have known each other for years. The sound fades as you move on, replaced by the hush of your own breathing. The lane widens into a tiny square with a single tree at its center. Beneath it sits an old stone bench worn smooth by countless years. A carved plaque set into the trunk tells of some long-past event, though the letters are so weathered, you can make out only fragments. Someone has left a small bundle of flowers at its base, their petals faintly luminous in the moonlight. A narrow archway leads you out of the square and into a back street. The air is thicker here, heavy with the mingled smells of cooking fat, stale beer, and the faint tang of metal from a nearby smithy. Even at this hour, a low fire burns within the forge. A blacksmith stands shirtless, hammering softly at a small piece of iron. Nothing like the clamorous work of daytime, but the quiet, deliberate shaping of a more delicate object. Sparks leap and vanish in the dark, winking out before they touch the ground. You continue past, feeling the warmth fade from your skin as you step back into the cooler night. The street leads you to the base of a tall, narrow tower, part of the old wall perhaps, or a standalone watchtower. Its base is thick and solid, its top crowned with a narrow platform. A guard leans against the parapet, his silhouette black against the stars. You imagine his view stretching far over the dark fields and woods, the faint glimmer of distant fires marking the homes of farmers and shepherds. Turning away from the tower, you wander down a street you don't recall seeing before. It's darker here, the lanterns fewer, the cobbles more uneven. The houses are older too, their beams warped with age, their plaster cracked and patched. Some have doors that sag on their hinges, the wood swollen from years of damp. And yet there's life here, a faint glow through a shutter, the sound of quiet laughter behind a wall, the smell of bread cooling on a sill. You slow your steps, letting the pace of the street seep into you. Every sound seems softer here, every movement gentler. Even the wind has a slower touch, threading through the eaves and whispering over the rooftops. Somewhere a dog gives a single contented huff before curling back into sleep. And as you make your way onward, you realize the night has become something like a companion, its sounds and silences walking beside you, its cool breath keeping pace. The medieval town is no longer just a place you're passing through. In this moment, it feels as though it has accepted you into its rhythm, letting you drift along as one of its own for a little while longer. You follow the sound of faint water trickling and find yourself in a low, narrow lane that ends at a covered conduit, an open-air water channel protected by a wooden roof. Here, townsfolk draw water for cooking or washing, filling pails that hang heavy from rope handles. At this hour, the place is deserted, save for a stray dog nosing around for scraps. The sound of the water is constant, a soft liquid murmur that seems to echo gently in the enclosed space. Beyond the conduit, the street opens into a cluster of small yards, each surrounded by rough timber fencing. In the nearest, you see the humped shapes of barrels, some upright, others lying on their sides. This is likely the cooper's storage, the products of days of bending and hammering. The smell of damp wood lingers here, sharp and slightly sweet. To your right, a faint glow seeps from under a stable door. You pause and peer in. The air inside is warm, thick with the scents of straw, leather, and horse. A palomino shifts in its stall, the faint clink of a harness echoing as it moves. A lantern hangs from a hook, burning low. Its light catches the dust in the air, each mote drifting lazily in the stillness. The stable boy, curled on a pile of sacks, snores softly, his cap tipped over his eyes. You return to the street and take a turning you don't remember passing before. It narrows almost at once, the cobblestones here, worn so uneven that they feel like the ridges of an old tree trunk underfoot. The lane climbs gently, then flattens into a wide ledge where a few stone houses sit shoulder to shoulder. Their windows are shuttered, but one doorway is ajar. From within comes the faint, rhythmic sound of a spinning wheel accompanied by the soft scrape of wool being drawn out into thread. You glimpse the back of a figure in the lamplight, someone working late, head bent in patient focus. Leaving the worker to their task, you drift along the ledge until the houses give way to a low wall. Beyond it lies a dark slope of gardens, their rows and beds barely visible in the moonlight. You catch the faint herbal scent of rosemary and thyme, a ghost of the summer's growth. The wall itself is cool and rough beneath your fingertips as you walk your palm brushing moss in the cracks. The lane bends sharply and begins to descend again. You hear it before you see it, the distant hollow boom of a night watchman's drum. The sound comes in slow intervals, each beat marking the hour and reassuring the town that the watch is awake. As you draw nearer to the center, the beat fades into the background, swallowed by the muted stirrings of nightlife that still flicker here and there. You step back into a more familiar quarter, recognizing a row of shuttered shops you passed earlier. A faint smell of herbs drifts from one of healer's, perhaps its shelves lined with dried bundles and jars of powders. The air is warmer here, though you can't tell if it's from the day's lingering heat or the proximity of so many closed-in spaces. Turning left, you find yourself beside a tall, narrow tower that stands apart from any wall. It might be a bell tower, or perhaps a place where the town criers call out news and decrees. A small flight of worn steps leads to its door, which is barred from the outside. A torch burns at its base, casting a faint halo on the cobbles and catching the glint of a metal plaque fixed into the stone. The inscription is too weathered to read fully, the letters softened into mystery by centuries of touch and rain. Past the tower, you enter a long street lined with high gabled houses. The facades here are more ornate than most, their woodwork carved into repeating patterns, scrolls, vines, even the occasional mythical beast. This is the home of prosperous merchants, their wealth shown not in sprawling estates, but in the careful craftsmanship of their dwellings. Even their shutters have been painted with geometric designs, though the night has dulled the colors to a faint whisper. The road here is smooth, its stones well set. Your steps make only a soft, regular tap as you pass. Every so often, a doorway is marked by a pair of small lanterns hung on iron hooks, an extra flourish to guide a late-coming guest or a returning family member. A few doors have baskets hung beside them covered in cloth. These might hold deliveries to be taken in with the morning. At the far end of the street, you meet another section of the inner wall. Here, the stone is clean and tightly set, the mortar neat. A guard leans against the parapet, his spear upright beside him, the tip catching a faint glimmer of torchlight. He seems relaxed, but you can tell he's watching eyes, scanning the street, checking each shadow. You pass without a word, feeling the weight of his gaze until you turn the corner. The corner leads you into a quieter stretch again, where houses step back from the road to make space for narrow gardens. You smell the faint sweetness of apples stored somewhere nearby, perhaps in a small cellar or loft. A light wind moves through, rustling the bare branches and sending a few dry leaves skipping across the stones. The sound is small but sharp in the stillness. At last you come to a small arched bridge over a stream, its railings smooth from years of hands resting there. You pause in the center and lean over, watching moonlight ripple over the moving water. Somewhere below, you catch the flash of a fish turning lazily, then vanishing into the dark. The air here is fresher, damp with the scent of running water and cold earth. And for a moment, standing here in the quiet, you realize how the whole town seems to breathe in rhythm, with the night slow, steady, unhurried. It's a rhythm that asks nothing from you but to notice it, to move with it, and to let it carry you deeper into the dark. You drift along a lane that seems to fold inward on itself, the upper floors of the houses bending together like old friends leaning close to share a secret. The timber beams above your head are dark with centuries of smoke, the plaster between them a pale, uneven patchwork. Your footsteps sound close here, almost private, as if the street is holding the sound in its narrow throat. A faint light spills from a doorway just ahead. As you pass, you see it's a baker's shop, the oven still glowing faintly from the day's work. The heat lingers in the stone walls, and the smell of cooling bread brushes past you like a warm hand. A few loaves sit on the counter inside, wrapped in cloth for morning customers. Somewhere in the back, someone hums softly, moving at an unhurried pace in the quiet. The lane bends sharply and delivers you into a courtyard hemmed in by tall, uneven buildings. Here, rainwater glistens in shallow pools on the cobbles, reflecting the pale light from a single lantern hung on an iron bracket. The air smells of damp stone and wood smoke. You notice a wooden cart leaned against one wall, its wheels bound with iron, the traces dangling loose as though the horse has only just been led away. In one corner, a small wooden trough overflows from a spout set into the wall. The water runs clear and cold, carrying the faint metallic tang of the pipe. You dip a hand in and feel the night's chill sink into your skin before you let it go. The trickle of water is a constant note here, a steady whisper under the silence. From the courtyard, you choose a narrow archway that leads into a quieter street. The houses here are smaller, their upper floors crooked and sagging, the plaster patched with odd bits of wood. Shutters are pulled tight, and doors are barred against the night. But as you walk, you hear the faint scrape of a chair across a floor, the creak of a bed frame, a cough muffled by a wall. Even in the deepest quiet, life hums steadily here. You come to a small shrine set into the corner of a house, a niche with a carved figure of a saint worn smooth by hands that have touched it over generations. Before it rests a tiny lamp, its wick trembling in the draught. The flame casts a soft halo on the saint's face, catching on the faint grooves that still remain from the chisel's work. You pause for a moment, not to pray, but to feel the stillness settle in you. The street leads downward toward the sound of running water. Soon you are at a low bridge spanning a narrow stream. Moss grows thick along its parapet, and the stones underfoot are slick. You lean over and watch the moonlight fracture on the ripples. Somewhere downstream, the stream will join the larger river that cradles the town, carrying with it the drift of leaves, petals, and whatever else the night has given to the water. Crossing the bridge, you find yourself in a part of town you haven't walked before. The buildings here are taller, their fronts adorned with painted signs, symbols of trade and craft, for those who cannot read. A golden key swings gently above a locksmith's door. A pair of wooden shears marks the tailor's. The sign for the apothecary bears a painted mortar and pestle, its colors dulled by years of sun and rain. The air smells faintly of herbs and resin here, perhaps from the apothecary's stock. Somewhere nearby, a cat yowls, once long and low, before retreating into the shadows. You glance toward the sound, but see nothing but the glimmer of eyes reflecting the lantern light. Ahead, a small open square reveals itself. In its center stands a tall post topped with an iron bracket, from which hangs a lantern. The glass panes are fogged with soot, but the flame inside burns steadily, marking the heart of this little neighborhood. Benches sit at the edges of the square, their wood rough and splintered. You imagine people gathering here on warm evenings, talking until the light fades completely. From the square, a wide road stretches toward the inner wall of the town. It's better paved than most streets you've walked tonight, the stones tightly set, the drainage channels on either side clean. The road curves gently upward, guiding you toward a gatehouse flanked by squat stone towers. The doors are closed for the night, but the postern door to one side is unbarred, left for those who have reason to pass under watch. A guard stands in the shadow of the arch, a spear resting lightly in his hand. His gaze flicks toward you, then away, content that you are no threat. You turn before reaching the gate, drawn instead to a side street that slopes toward the sound of the river. Here the houses are built almost right to the water's edge, their foundations of heavy stone sunk deep into the bank. Small wooden docks jut into the dark water, each holding a boat tied by thick rope. The smell of the river rises up, damp earthen, touched with the faintest trace of fish. A final lantern burns at the end of the dockside street, its light casting a wavering path over the black water. You follow its glow until you stand at the edge, looking across the slow, dark current to the far bank. The reflection of the lantern floats there, trembling like a small golden coin dropped in a deep well. The night air is cool on your face, and for a moment, everything is still except the river itself. You linger by the river for a while, listening to the slow, steady lap of water against the moored boats. It's a quiet sound, yet it seems to carry a weight older than the town itself, as though the river has been whispering here for centuries, unmoved by the rise and fall of walls or markets. Somewhere far upstream, a faint splash breaks the stillness. Perhaps a fish leaping, perhaps something dropped from a boat. When you turn away from the river, you take a narrow street that rises gently, curving out of sight, between a mix of warehouses and small dwellings. The smell of dried grain drifts from one doorway, sweet and faintly dusty. Another building smells of resin and sawdust. A carpenter's shop, perhaps though its shutters are firmly latched. A pair of steps lead you into a tiny square, paved with flat stones, their surfaces slick in places where moss clings. A tall post stands at the square's center, topped with a small wooden roof. Beneath it, a public notice board bears scraps of parchment, their ink blurred with age and weather. A few are nailed, crookedly flapping in the light breeze. You can't read them in the dim light, but you know they carry everything from town decrees to market schedules, and perhaps even a lost item or two. One corner of the square is occupied by a tavern, its door closed, but light leaking faintly through the shutters. The sound of quiet voices hums from inside, low enough to suggest the night's drinkers are winding down. You pass it by, letting the door's glow fade behind you, as you take another lane, this one flanked by simple houses with overhanging upper stories. The street soon narrows, turning into a covered passageway between two close-built houses. The air here is cooler still, carrying the scent of damp plaster and aged timber. Your steps sound hollow on the uneven cobbles, each one echoing softly, until you emerge again under the open sky. Ahead lies a row of workshops, all shuttered for the night. You recognize the shapes of trades by their signs. A hammer for the blacksmith, a bellows for the tanner, a loaf of bread for the baker. The signs creak gently in the faint wind, their chains clicking in their iron rings. You pass a small, open-fronted shed stacked with bundles of firewood. The logs are neatly tied, their rough bark dark with sap. The smell of pine lingers clean and sharp. A stray cat slips out from behind the pile and winds silently past your legs, its tail brushing your calf before it vanishes into the dark. The lane here meets another wider street, one you recognize from earlier in your walk. A faint memory of passing this way in the other direction tugs at you, though the street feels subtly different now, quieter, emptier, as though it has settled deeper into the night. At the far end of the street, you see the spire of the church rising above the rooftops, its silhouette like a black needle pricking the sky. A faint glimmer catches on the cross at its peak. Perhaps the last of the moonlight, before clouds begin to drift across. You find yourself drawn toward it, passing between houses, whose windows are all dark now, even the restless ones. The church stands in a small walled yard, its heavy wooden doors shut. A pair of lamps burns on either side of the entrance, their flames small but steady. The stone under your hand is cold and slightly rough, the mortar between blocks, weathered but solid. You trace it briefly before moving on, skirting the side of the building, where the shadows deepen and the air smells faintly of damp stone and old earth. A low iron gate leads into a narrow alley that runs behind the churchyard. The ground here is softer, more uneven. Your boots sink slightly into patches of earth, and somewhere water drips steadily into a small puddle. The sound of your passage seems louder here, so close to the stillness of the graves beyond the wall. The alley opens onto another part of the town. You've yet to see a small cluster of houses, arranged in a half circle around a central post. Hanging from the post is a lantern, its glow barely reaching the edges of the circle. You can make out barrels and crates stacked against some of the houses, and in one doorway a dog lies curled, lifting its head briefly before settling again. You walk on, letting the circle fade behind you as you take a lane that slopes downward toward the outer wall. The stones here are rougher, the path slightly rutted. The wall itself rises ahead, solid and patient. You can hear the faint shuffle of a guard on the parapet above pacing his watch. Somewhere to your right, you spot a narrow door set into the wall, a sally port perhaps for quick movement beyond the town's defenses. It is barred for the night. Following the wall, you pass beneath an arch where a torch burns in a metal bracket. The flame's light flickers against the curve of stone, making the shadows seem to breathe. The air is cooler here, carrying with it the faint scent of open country beyond. You pause briefly, feeling the difference in the air, then turn back toward the heart of the town. The road you take leads you through a part of town where the houses are set farther apart. Each has a small fenced yard, some with trees whose bare branches make tangled patterns against the sky. You hear the faint creak of a sign swinging in the wind, a painted mug marking an alehouse that sleeps now until the next evening's custom. And as you pass, you notice how the sound of your own steps feels slower now, as though you've fallen into the same unhurried rhythm as the sleeping town. The night has grown deep, and the edges between one street and the next are softer, less distinct. The town is no longer a series of separate places. It's one long breath drawn in darkness, waiting for dawn. The street bends gently, leading you into a quarter where the houses feel older still. The beams are dark as tar, the plaster between them cracked in fine lines like a network of old roads. Many of the doors are reinforced with iron bands, their hinges thick and sturdy. You notice how the thresholds have been worn into shallow curves by centuries of feet, each step adding the smallest breath of change. Here, the cobblestones are uneven, some tilting just enough to catch your boot. A small puddle reflects the pale shimmer of the cloud-filtered moon breaking softly as you step past. Somewhere behind a shutter, you hear a slow, rhythmic sound, the soft rasp of a whetstone on metal. The sound fades as you move on, leaving only the murmur of the wind threading through the narrow spaces. You come to a broad, low-roofed building whose doors are barred from the inside. The faint smell of grain hangs around it, perhaps a granary holding the town's precious stores against hunger or hard winters. Stacked against its side are several heavy sacks tied tight and left under a canvas sheet. The sheet flutters faintly in the night breeze, making a sound like slow applause. Turning left, you find yourself in a lane lined with more modest homes. A few have small benches outside their doors, worn smooth by years of use. One bench is occupied by a cloaked figure, hunched forward, their hands clasped loosely. The figure doesn't speak, only glances at you briefly, before returning their gaze to the street. You pass quietly, leaving their silence undisturbed. The lane opens into a tiny market square, far smaller than the great market you saw earlier. Here, a handful of stalls stand empty, their frames leaning slightly, the cloth awnings rolled up tight for the night. A single lantern sways at one corner, casting a restless oval of light on the cobbles. In that pool of light sits a wooden cart. Its wheels chalked with a stone, a scattering of vegetables left forgotten in its bed. On the far side of the square, a narrow alley catches your attention. The ground here is damp, the stones slick. You move slowly, brushing your hand along the rough wall for balance. About halfway through, you pass under a wooden beam that spans the gap between two houses. The wood smells faintly of tar, perhaps treated against the weather. Emerging from the alley, you find yourself beside a building whose arched windows are covered in oiled parchment. From inside comes a faint herbal scent, stronger than the apothecary's earlier, mingled with a sharper note like crushed garlic. This could be the home of a healer, or perhaps a cook preparing something in the quiet hours before dawn. The street curves and slopes downward, leading toward a section of the wall you haven't yet explored. You pass under another archway, where the torchlight is dimmer, the flame shivering in its iron cradle. The walls here are thicker, the stonework more irregular, suggesting this may be one of the older parts of the fortifications. Beyond the arch lies a short stretch of open ground, and then the wall itself rises in a broad curve. Its top is crowned with crenellations dark against the lighter sky. A guard walks slowly along the parapet, his silhouette marked by the slight bounce of his step. Below the road runs parallel to the wall, for a time the surface sprinkled with gravel that crunches under your feet. You follow it until you reach a corner where a small turret juts outward. Here, the stone is colder, the shadows deeper. The turret door is bolted shut, but a small slit window above you gleams faintly with the reflection of the moon. Leaving the wall behind you, turn inward again, taking a narrow side street that winds like a thread through a loom. It leads you past a cluster of low buildings with thatched roofs, their chimneys thin and crooked. The smell of smoke hangs low here, carrying a trace of sweet herbs burned with the wood. Perhaps someone believes it keeps away bad spirits, or perhaps it's simply tradition. One doorway stands open to the night. Inside, a single candle burns on a table, its light showing the curve of a spinning wheel and a skein of yarn draped over a chair. A woman sits at the wheel, her back to the door, turning the spindle with slow, patient movements. The rhythm is so steady, you can almost hear the faint hum of the thread winding tighter. Past her house, the road widens into another little square. This one holds a well at its center, its wooden frame casting a long shadow across the cobbles. The bucket rests just above the water, the rope wound neatly on its beam. A stone bench sits against one wall, and beside it, a low brazier glows faintly, sending up a thread of smoke that drifts lazily into the night. You sit for a moment on the bench, feeling the warmth of the brazier on your hands. The glow of the coals is hypnotic deep orange, shifting subtly with the stir of air. Around you, the town breathes its slow, steady breath. The streets feel softer now, the shapes of houses blending into one another in the dimness. You rise again and continue the sound of your boots on stone falling into the same rhythm as your breathing. Ahead, the lane begins to climb once more toward the higher quarter, the stones drier here, the air carrying a faint promise of dawn far beyond the rooftops. The climb is gentle at first, but the higher you go, the more the street narrows and tilts, as though it's winding toward some hidden heart. The stones are drier here, pale under the faint spill of moonlight. A few windows along the way glow faintly, each one a small square star set in the dark walls. You catch glimpses of shadows moving behind them. Perhaps a restless sleeper pacing, perhaps someone tending a fire to keep it alive through the coldest hours. A low arch passes over the lane ahead, joining two houses at their upper floors. You duck slightly as you walk beneath the timbers above close enough to touch. The wood smells faintly of resin and smoke, a scent soaked in by years of winter fires. Beyond the arch, the road straightens, climbing toward a wide terrace that overlooks the town below. When you reach it, the view is a quilt of roofs stitched together by the pale seams of the streets. Lanterns burn here and there like embers scattered through ash. You can see the broad stripe of the river glinting faintly, its surface moving slow under the moon. Somewhere in the far distance, you catch the faint bark of a dog, a sound so small it only sharpens the stillness. The terrace is bordered by a low wall, its stone blocks mottled with lichen. Leaning on it, you can feel the cool dampness of the stone against your forearms. From here, the tower of the church rises close by its pointed spire, pricking at the sky. You can see where the roof tiles catch the moonlight in dull streaks, and how the weathered cross at its peak seems almost to fade into the clouds drifting past. A narrow stairway winds down from the terrace into a tucked-away street below. You take it slowly, your hand brushing the wall for balance. The steps are worn into soft dips at their centers, proof of countless feet passing this way. At the bottom, you find yourself in a lane so quiet, it feels apart from the rest of the town. The air is cooler here, touched with the dampness of nearby gardens. You pass a row of houses set behind small gates. Each has its own patch of yard, some with bare winter trees, others with low sheds for tools. One yard holds a pile of firewood stacked neatly against the wall, the ends of the logs bright where they've been freshly split. Another has a small wooden bench under a trellis, its slats casting faint shadows in the moonlight. The lane bends sharply and delivers you into a courtyard with a dry fountain at its center. The basin is shallow, its carved lip chipped in places. A cluster of ivy spills over one edge, its leaves catching the light in dull glints. Benches ring the fountain, though tonight they sit empty. The only sound here is the faint sigh of wind moving between the close-set buildings. From the courtyard, you follow a narrow gap between two houses, barely wide enough to pass through without brushing the walls. The plaster on both sides is rough beneath your fingers, scored with shallow grooves from tools or repairs made years ago. Emerging on the other side, you find a tiny square lit by a single wall-mounted lantern. One side of the square is taken up by the entrance to what looks like a guild hall, a stout, timber-framed building with its heavy door set deep into the wall. The iron handle glints faintly, its curve polished by many hands. Above the doorway, a small wooden plaque bears a symbol you don't quite recognize. Moving on, you take another lane that drops toward the market quarter. The air here carries a faint tang of dried herbs and stored goods, as though the smells of the day are reluctant to leave entirely. You pass a shuttered stall where bundles of onions hang in neat ropes, their papery skins rustling faintly when the wind turns. Another shop has a rack of wooden spoons and bowls propped under its eaves, each one smooth and pale in the dim light. The lane widens enough to allow a small cart through. You hear the faint creak of wooden wheels somewhere ahead, and soon you see it, a handcart piled with sacks pushed by a lone figure moving slowly through the night. Their steps are steady, unhurried. The sacks shift slightly with each bump of the cobblestones, the sound of grain within whispering like sand poured from a jar. You step aside to let them pass, and they give a brief nod in thanks before disappearing into the next curve of the street. You follow at a distance, letting the faint rhythm of their wheels guide you forward. Soon you reach the edge of the market square. Even emptied of its daytime chaos, it still feels like the heart of the town. The stone cross at its center stands tall and silent, its base damp with evening mist. A few wooden crates lie stacked near the edge of the square, and beside them a sleeping dog curls on a piece of burlap. Its chest rises and falls in slow, steady breaths, unbothered by your quiet passing. The air here is still touched only by the faint metallic ring of a far-off bell marking the hour. It's a soft sound, but it carries through the sleeping streets, counting time that almost no one is awake to hear. The chime fades, leaving behind a stillness so complete you can almost hear the town breathing. The market square seems to draw in that breath and hold it its cobblestones glistening faintly with a sheen of night damp. You drift toward the far side past shuttered stalls and doorways bolted against the dark. The faint smell of hay catches your attention, and you realize you're nearing the edge where merchants tether their pack animals during the day. A row of wooden posts stands along the wall, each with a loop of rope hanging slack. In the shadows beyond a few shapes, shift quietly mules or small horses left to rest for the night. Their breaths curl into the air in soft plumes, and the occasional shift of a hoof clicks gently on the stones. One animal lifts its head and watches you for a moment, ears twitching before lowering its gaze again. From here, a narrow passage leads you away from the square, its entrance marked by two old stone bollards, worn smooth at the top. The lane beyond is darker still, hemmed in by high walls that lean slightly inward. Water trickles faintly along the gutter, catching slivers of light from a lantern far ahead. Your own footsteps sound louder here, and you find yourself slowing to match the quiet. The lane opens into a small enclosed court where a single tree grows from the center. Its branches are bare this time of year, but its roots push up through the cobbles in thick, stubborn ridges. A low stone bench curves along one side, and in the opposite corner a shutter stands ajar, letting out a blade of warm light. The smell of something baking drifts through, perhaps a pie or a loaf set near the fire to keep warm until morning. You move on following a side path that runs between houses close enough that their eaves almost touch. Overhead laundry lines sag under the weight of cloth left to dry stiff now in the night chill. A corner of one sheet stirs as you pass, brushing your shoulder with a faint whisper. Beyond you find a long row of modest dwellings, each with a small stoop of 2 or 3 steps. Some have potted herbs lined up outside others' baskets, and tools stacked neatly by the door. One doorway is marked by a sprig of dried rosemary tied with red thread, perhaps a charm, perhaps just a habit passed down from older generations. The road bends toward the sound of running water. You soon reach a narrow stone bridge spanning one of the smaller canals that thread through the town. The water here is slow and dark, glimmering faintly under the moon. Moss clings to the bridge's stones and the rail is slick beneath your hand. The air smells of damp wood and river silt, with just a faint trace of smoke drifting from some unseen chimney. On the far side, the houses stand a little taller, their upper stories projecting so far over the street that you feel enclosed as you walk. Lanterns hang from a few doorways, casting pale pools of light on the cobbles. You hear the scrape of wood on wood somewhere nearby, a shutter being eased open perhaps to let in a little air. But when you glance upward, the movement has already stilled. The lane leads you to another square, smaller than the last, with a stone fountain at its center. Water spills quietly from the mouth of a carved lion into a basin green with age. A single lantern burns beside it, turning the ripples into shifting patterns of gold. On a bench near the fountain, a man sits hunched under a cloak head, bowed, hands folded. He neither looks up nor speaks as you pass. From here, you take a street that slopes downward again toward the outer wall. The cobbles are rougher here with patches of bare earth where wagons have worn the stones away. In the distance, you can see the shadow of a gate tower rising against the faint gleam of the sky. The road curves toward it, the air cooler with every step. When you reach the wall, you find the postern gate shut tight, the wooden door reinforced with thick iron straps. A guard stands in the arch's shadow, wrapped in a long cloak, his spear leaning lightly against one shoulder. He gives a small nod as you pass, but says nothing, his eyes already scanning the darkness beyond. You follow the wall for a while, the sound of your steps softened by the uneven dirt. The scent of open fields drifts faintly over the stones, reminding you of the world beyond these walls, wide, quiet, and for now far away. At last you turn inward again, choosing a lane that threads back toward the center. It is almost entirely dark save for a single lantern at the far end. As you walk toward it, the light grows until it spills across your path, warm and steady, marking the quiet heart of another sleeping neighborhood. The lantern at the end of the lane sways faintly in the wind, its glow painting soft, honey-colored patches on the worn cobbles. As you pass beneath it, the metal frame gives a small creak, and the light catches briefly on the slick edges of the stones, making them shine like a wet riverbed. The air here feels just a touch warmer, sheltered by the buildings crowding close on either side. The street turns sharply, guiding you into a small, open space between three tall houses. Their upper floors lean out as if trying to peer into the space below their timbers, creaking faintly in the night breeze. In the center stands a covered well, its roof sagging slightly with age, its bucket resting empty on the stone rim. Someone has left a clay mug beside it, perhaps for the next thirsty passerby. One of the houses here has a narrow balcony of blackened wood. A pot of dried lavender sits at its edge, the brittle stalks rattling softly whenever the wind stirs. The scent is faint, but lingers enough to remind you of summer days when the streets would have been filled with its perfume. You take the road that curls away from the square, and it leads you past a row of low-roofed shops, all closed tight for the night. The painted signs above the doors sway on their iron brackets, a loaf of bread for the baker, a set of scales for the merchant, a mortar and pestle for the spice seller. Even in darkness, the shapes are unmistakable, silent heralds of their trades. The air shifts subtly as you walk, touched now by the tang of the river. You follow the scent and soon find yourself back at the water's edge, though in a quieter stretch than before. A short stone quay juts out here, its surface mottled with patches of moss. Ropes are tied to stout wooden posts, securing a pair of small boats that bob gently in the current. The sound of water against their hulls is a slow, rhythmic slap, the same note repeated over and over, as if the river were breathing. You linger for a moment, leaning on the quay's edge. The sky above is dimming as the moon slides behind a veil of cloud, softening the light on the water. Across the river, the opposite bank is little more than a dark shape with only a few scattered glimmers hinting at life beyond. Leaving the quay, you follow a narrow street that hugs the waterline before turning sharply uphill. The climb is steep, the stones uneven, and you slow your pace to steady your footing. A wall rises on your left, built of large, rough-cut blocks. On your right, the houses are smaller but tightly packed, their plaster walls painted in faded shades of ochre and cream. Halfway up, you pass under a low arch that joins two buildings. The air here is still, almost too still, as if even the wind avoids this narrow throat of stone. When you emerge on the other side, the street flattens into a small platform with a view over the rooftops toward the heart of town. You can see the church spire again, dim now under the heavy clouds, and the shadow of the market square beyond it. From here, another lane beckons you running between rows of houses, with their upper floors jutting out so far they nearly meet overhead. The space between them feels like a tunnel, the darkness deepening until it's broken by a lone candle burning in a window. You glimpse the shape of a hand inside moving slowly as it folds cloth, perhaps a tailor, finishing a last piece before sleep. The lane eventually spills you into a small yard with a single lamppost standing sentinel in the middle. Around its base, the cobbles are slick from a recent shower reflecting the light in soft ripples. A bench sits just at the edge of the glow empty, but bearing the marks of long use. You can almost imagine the quiet conversations that have unfolded there on warmer nights. Beyond the yard, a broad, gently curving street leads you toward the inner wall once more. The stones here are smoother, the air quieter still. As you near the wall, the looming shadow of a gate tower comes into view. The heavy doors are shut, but a small postern stands ajar, guarded by a single man with a hood pulled low over his brow. He leans on his spear, unmoving, except for the faint turn of his head as you approach. You give a nod, and he responds with the barest lift of his chin. Rather than pass through, you follow the street as it turns inward again, taking you deeper into the sleeping maze. The houses here seem to hold their breath, the shutters drawn tight, the alleys dark and narrow. Your own footsteps are the only sound, and even they seem to fade more quickly, as if the night itself were absorbing them. And in that stillness, the town feels both impossibly old and quietly alive, a place suspended between centuries, holding its shape against time, waiting for the next day to stir it fully awake. The street you follow curves gently, drawing you toward a part of town where the air feels different, cooler, touched by the faint breath of open ground beyond the walls. The cobblestones are worn smooth here, their edges rounded by centuries of use. You hear the soft, irregular tap of water, dripping somewhere nearby, though the source stays hidden in the shadows between houses. A lantern burns at a corner ahead. Its glass clouded the flame inside, wavering slightly with each turn of the wind. Beneath it, a narrow stairway descends between two tall buildings. You take it slowly, your hand brushing the cold, damp wall for balance. At the bottom, the stair opens onto a small terrace that overlooks a lower stretch of the town. The roofs below are huddled close together, their chimneys leaning like tired sentinels. To your right, an arched passage leads under one of the larger houses. The timbers overhead are blackened and polished with age, and your footsteps echo faintly as you pass through. The passage delivers you into a quiet courtyard, where a stone trough stands beneath a spout carved in the shape of a lion's head. Water trickles steadily into the basin, making a soft, repetitive sound that seems to fill the whole enclosed space. Against one wall, an old wooden cart rests on its side, its iron-bound wheels leaning into the corner, as if too weary to stand upright. A few empty baskets are stacked nearby, their handles frayed and splintered. You can almost picture the courtyard alive in daylight. The cart laden with goods, the baskets filled the trough, splashing as someone draws water for the day's work. You take a narrow lane out of the courtyard and find yourself moving uphill once again. The climb is lined with houses that grow larger the higher you go. Their upper floors adorned with carved brackets and small balconies. Some have lanterns burning at their doors, casting warm rectangles of light onto the cobbles. You pass one doorway, where a cat sits perched on the step tail curled neatly around its paws, watching you with a steady, unblinking gaze. The lane ends at a broad platform set against the inner wall. From here, the view is wide, the river in its slow sweep beyond the far wall, the quilt of rooftops beneath you, the faint glimmer of lanterns marking the main streets. Above it all, the church spire stands dark and tall, a constant point in the shifting maze. A wooden bench sits along the wall, its surface polished smooth by years of use. You rest here for a moment, feeling the cool air rising from the fields beyond the town. Somewhere in that open dark, a nightbird calls a single low note that drifts across the rooftops before fading. When you rise, you follow the wall toward a narrow tower whose base is tucked into the corner of the platform. Its door is shut, the iron latch dull with use, but you can hear faint movement inside, perhaps a guard shifting his stance or simply the creak of wood settling. The sound is brief, then gone, leaving only the soft hiss of the breeze against the stone. You descend once more into the streets, taking a road that winds through a quieter quarter. Here the houses are smaller, their windows low to the ground, their doors framed with plain stone lintels. A few have small gardens in front, fenced with low wattle hurdles. Even in the dim light, you can see winter cabbages and leeks standing in neat rows, their leaves beaded with dew. The road carries you past a tiny chapel wedged between two taller buildings. Its door is marked with a simple cross carved into the wood. Through a narrow window, you glimpse the faint glow of a single candle burning inside. The light falls on a small altar draped with cloth, a still point in the deep quiet of the street. Beyond the chapel, the lane slopes downward again, toward the river. The sound of water grows as you approach not the slow lap you heard before, but the more insistent rush of a mill race. You find it spilling past the low stone wall of a mill, its wheel dark and still for the night. The wooden paddles gleam faintly where water clings to them, and the air is rich with the scent of wet timber and flour dust. From here, a narrow bridge carries you back across the stream. The boards underfoot creak gently, and the river whispers below, sliding over stone and shadow alike. On the far side, you follow a path that climbs again toward the heart of town, the sound of the water fading behind you until the streets are quiet once more. The climb from the bridge brings you to a lane you've walked before, though it feels softer now under the weight of the hour. The cobbles are cool beneath your feet, and the air carries that faint mingling of wood smoke, damp stone, and something sweet, perhaps the trace of bread baked earlier in the night. You move slowly, letting your steps fall in time with the stillness all around you. Ahead, a lantern burns low in an iron bracket. Its flame trembles against the glass painting, shifting shadows across the timbered wall beside it. You pause under its light, feeling the warmth just enough to remind you of the cold clinging to your sleeves. Above the narrow strip of sky between rooftops is soft with cloud, the moon only a pale blur behind it. You follow the lane toward the market quarter again, the stones here slick from a light mist. The stalls stand folded and silent, their canvas covers tied down tight. A scattering of crates lies in one corner, a few sprigs of herbs still clinging to their stems inside. The stone cross at the square's heart rises dark against the lighter sky, its base wreathed in shadow. From the square, you take a smaller lane that drifts toward the church. Its heavy doors are closed, but the faint glow of candles seeps through the tall windows, their light diffused by wavering glass. A bell hangs silent in the tower above its rope, swaying ever so slightly in the draught. Past the church, you find yourself in the oldest quarter. The buildings here lean more sharply, their beams darker, their plaster patched with the uneven hands of many years. The streets narrow until they feel almost like corridors guiding you between walls that hold the night close. Somewhere a shutter closes softly, the sound carrying farther than it should in the stillness. You wander toward the edge of town past the guardhouse at the main gate. The doors are shut, the portcullis down, but the watchman at the parapet gives a slow nod as you pass under his gaze. Beyond the wall lies only the deep, open, dark fields and woods hushed under the same sky. Turning back, you make one last circuit through the sleeping streets. You see again the benches left empty for the night, the wells stilled, the shop signs swaying faintly in the breeze. Every corner, every shadow, every soft glimmer of light from a shuttered window seems to fold into the same steady breath. And with each step, you feel the town settle deeper into its rest, an old quiet heart beating in the darkness, waiting for morning to open its eyes again. The streets you've walked tonight are settling into the deepest part of their slumber now. Every sound has softened, every shadow drawn a little closer to the walls. The faint hiss of the wind through the alleys feels slower, like the town itself is breathing in long, steady rhythm. Even the river's murmur has taken on a gentler note, a lull in its endless conversation with the stones. The last lanterns are burning down their flames, small and low, fighting off the darkness, just enough to keep their promise of light until morning. Above the clouds drift unhurriedly past the blurred face of the moon. The rooftops below hold their shapes in quiet patience, waiting for dawn to wash them in gold again. You've traced these streets from the market to the river, from the watchtowers to the humblest lanes, and each step has settled you deeper into the calm of the night. Here the walls and gates are not barriers but gentle arms, holding the life of the town safe until it wakes. Let your own thoughts settle now as the towns have done. The small noises, the sigh of the wind, the tap of some loose shutter, the muted drip of water are like the last words in a long story fading softly into silence. Somewhere a cock will crow too early, and a baker will stoke the first oven of the day. But that is for later. Right now, the night belongs entirely to rest. The streets have been walked, the market emptied the doors, barred the wells still. There is nothing more to do. Breathe in the quiet. Breathe out the day. Let the medieval town fade into the dark and carry its peace with you into sleep.